All right. So this is the Cosmos Café, January 29th, 2019. We have a reading assigned, which is never necessary to do the reading, but it's very useful so you understand the context. But we're reading from William Connolly's Prelude to Facing the Planetary, which is subtitled Entangled Humanism and the Politics of Swarming. The prelude is Myth and the Planetary. A little bit about William Connolly. This is from his Wikipedia page. He's a political theorist known for his work on democracy and pluralism, and currently professor of political science at Johns Hopkins University. The pluralism he explores is multidimensional. So maybe pluralism can be loosely defined as how power and influence are distributed in the political process. So Connolly seeks to inform us of a more multidimensional approach. So how he introduces how non-human forces and powers and processes influence and are entangled. He uses the term entangled humanism, how that's entangled within our politics, within our various structures, societies, cultures. And in this prelude, the myth and the planetary, he uses the book of Job, the story, he's seeking in this book to define a collective myth, perhaps. So he begins with this well-known myth, the book of Job. So we know Job has a series of very unfortunate events. So he questions the cosmic story that of his time, and he gets a response first from other people around him, letting him know, well, perhaps you did something wrong. Perhaps you caused this. Perhaps you're going against this story that has been placed in front of you. But he doesn't fully accept that. He checks around, checks his inventory there and says, well, no, I think I've been doing pretty well. And later he finally receives an answer from God, and that puts things into perspective for him. I don't want to do too much interpreting, but Connolly, I think, uses this story to draw attention to the forces, the multitude of forces that interact with humans. So a quote from the paper, he says, the voice of God adopts a tone that soars above the debate between Job and the friends. It speaks of a rich, variegated world filled with multifarious life, each mode pursuing distinctive vectors and powers. Even more, these multifarious forces and beings are not designed to serve humanity in the first and last instance. So the bigger picture is not necessarily designed for us. So I believe Connolly is motivated by our current time, the larger ecological issues. Later on in the book, he draws on Nietzsche and Whitehead, Deleuze, and incorporates process philosophy along with many other strands into the conversation. So with that said, I'll let Johnny kind of take over from here.
Thank you. I was very startled recently by a New York Times report. This was last week. On the front page, it reported that 1/5 of the coral reef has died in the last 3 years. Liminal comes from limen, which means threshold. Liminality is the transitional phase of a rite of passage during which the participant lacks status, the hidden, the weird, the unsayable, of or relating to sensory threshold, in between life and death. The in-between of the liminal, I believe, has many of us have been in those situations where we couldn't make sense and we didn't know what to do. And those can be very creative, also very destructive periods in our lives. I believe we're going through this collectively now. All of humanity is now in this liminal zone together. And this, I think, I hear some background noise. Does someone have, thank you. Maybe we can learn something that might be useful for us. Maybe we can learn how to be a companion species, as Donna Haraway hopes that we can. And I believe this book, Facing the Planetary, the first chapter, he focuses on Job and the liminal space that Job enters into. I would like to, he also, in this book, he looks at nihilism, both passive and active forms of nihilism, and materialism, and a whole lot more. I just want to quote, and about politics, I want to quote from a great political drama, Macbeth. This is a pivotal moment in the play. This is a tyrant, a bloody tyrant. There's a cry off stage. Wherefore was that cry? Macbeth asks. The servant comes on and says, the queen, my lord, is dead. Macbeth, she should have died hereafter. There would have been time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that frets and struts his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. 'Tis a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Then there's more noise off stage. There's a battle that's getting ready to start. The servant comes on, the soldier comes on and tells him that we got to get started. The enemy's at the gate. And Macbeth, I think this, he says, ring the alarum bell. I begin to be aweary of the sun and wish the estate of all the world were now undone. Low winds, come wrack, at least we'll die with harness on our back. And he exits. And that's his last battle. So I think that sort of summarizes and eloquently a deep nihilistic perspective. And unfortunately for us, I think this nihilism is very deep in our culture. And I believe William Connolly agrees with me there. There are virulent forms of it, like the oil companies, drill, baby, drill. And then there are passive forms of it, like the one I think manifested by Barack Obama. I think there's a deep relationship between materialism, capitalism, neoliberalism, and nihilism. And I believe this author really enters into the weave, and I think exposes some of our, the dark side of our human nature, and also I think some very positive qualities that we may be able to draw upon to create a coherent, what he's calling a coherent we space. I mean, if we can create enough people in enough time who can become more sensitive to what's happening and who are able to enter into these liminal zones, this will not be pleasant and it will not create a profit for anybody. So I think we don't know what's on the other side of this transition. And I believe I'm drawing now on an article that was shared with me by Doug, the Nora Bateson article, Liminal Leadership. And she posed this question, what could leadership mean in the Anthropocene? So I have a lot more to say that really, you know, hopefully we can create some imaginative responses rather than, you know, just dwell on the old stuff that we know doesn't work. And I think we're in that transition zone. I think Nora said it well. There's like the old cowboy shows, those old rodeos where you had the cowboy standing on two horses that were running. So he has one foot on the back of one horse, one foot on the back of the other horse. And that's the kind of situation we're in. So I'm wanting to open this up to an open frame. And I'm glad to see that Ryan is here because you're in the Bateson group along with Doug and I. So I think some of the conversations we've had in the Bateson study group resonates very much with this particular text. So I'd be very curious if Doug and Ryan, if y'all wanna, you know, bring some of that forward into this mix, into our cafe. I think it could be really stimulating. So thank you all very much for this opportunity.
Now I'll check in with Marco, who stated he might have to leave a little early. I will put you on the spot, so do you have any first thoughts or final thoughts before you have to go, or do you even have to go?
I don't technically have to go. And whatever I do will be a choice. But I showed up because I wanted to be available for any conversation that wanted to happen that might require me, or otherwise I don't have anything particular to say. I did do the reading, and I listened to your your appetizer talk, the talk you and John did. And as I messaged in the forum, I'm in the midst of a kind of crunch week where I have to kind of close some deals, if you will, that relate to making money and work and professional life. And so I needed to write something this morning, and I ended up not writing it because I became interested in this paper. However, it would be pragmatically best for me not to stick around for the full 2 hours and to use the waking energy that I have and the kind of, you know, freshness of mind to get done what I have to get done. Because if I do get it done, and it works, I'll have a bit more freedom and ease. At least that's what I'm anticipating in the coming next week and the coming weeks, and be able to manage the multiple streams of conversation that we have going on, which, you know, to me are very important. It's something that I really want to care for, steward. But I can't be everywhere at once. So I have to kind of pick and choose where I put my attention and like what's most urgent. So I'm open for questions. And if there are none, I can just offer one little thought that came to mind in reading this piece that might offer just an alternative framing and some maybe conceptual bridge to, I think, discussing what Connolly is bringing to our attention in the piece.
Is there anyone else have anything to say? Please chime in. It's an open frame. Wherever you want to start is fine.
I'll start off with where you left off, John, talking about kind of the we space. There was a quote that I didn't quote earlier because I felt it was too long, which I might dip into here, but it reminds me of Gebser's use of we. I made a comment a while back, maybe a year ago, of how in his work he is using we as a term as a pronoun for those of us seeking, not necessarily politically seeking, but seeking an alternative story, which he gets to, as I've picked up on loosely reading throughout the book, this we space. So he's addressing the we, but I'll read this quote as maybe a chance to spark some interest into our life into this conversation. But he says, and I think this is from chapter 5, which is about the politics of swarming, and but he says, but an extended we may be in the works, a we creatively composed of diverse constituencies set in a variety of world regions, faiths, classes, and other subject positions. Each invites others to enter into a loose assemblage, as it also retains a distinctive sense of time, place, belonging, suffering, and possibility. A we that is a complex assemblage of dispersed constituencies rather than reducible to a class, a nation to be, a shared religious creed, or a world government in the making. A we in which many participants see through the histories of extractive capitalism, attend to differential modes of suffering promoted by it, pursue attachments to this world, and do these without projecting a future promise that is too smooth or untrammeled. And tying that in with his entangled humanism, in which we're also tied in with the world around us. So we have layers upon layers of various myths and stories that we all, as individuals or as separate tribes, have in mind as we project into the world or project into the future. And these various strands that Connolly, he's bringing attention that we may never approach a collective myth. But so how do we do that? How, what, like Johnny's saying and Nora Bateson's saying, what does leadership mean today? What does it mean to ask for a political meaning? I don't know.
Hi, Michael. Does anyone have anything different that they want to share?
I want to pick up on this we thing on the one hand, but I also have a question about the text in a very, very specific form. He uses the word desert in two places where I don't understand what he's saying. So I'd like some help with that part, but let me get to that in a second. What's the practical consequence of what he's saying? What is he actually envisioning? I mean, it's really nice that we all sit around and we talk about, we'd like to have a we space. You know, I have lots of we spaces in my life. This is one of them. I come to this cafe almost every Tuesday, and for the most part, I'm glad to see Ryan's here. We have a new face amongst us. Otherwise, it's usually old men with beards looking at each other, kind of thing. We got a couple of young people in here, so don't get me wrong. But and that's one kind of space. Is this one of these, whatever he calls them, these cross-regional? I don't know. There's too much jargon in most of this stuff. You know? What's he call them? You guys know. You read this better than I did.
Assemblages might be the word.
Pluralist assemblages. That's it. Okay. Cross-regional pluralist assemblages. I have an idea. I can get a picture in my head of what that might mean, but I don't know if that's what he's looking. I haven't read the whole book. I only got it yesterday, and I read the prelude dutifully for our get-together this evening, so I'm not as well as informed. But you know, how does he mention this? How this like concretizes or give examples of things like that? I'm a big fan of examples.
Yes, he does.
On the uptake sometimes.
He does, actually. He uses the gay movement as an excellent example of what happens when people from different classes, different walks of life, different ethnicities, different religions, different nations come together, mobilizing their resources and taking care of one another. And I've mentioned this story before, but back in the 80s, at the beginning of the AIDS crisis, I had to do something. I had lost a very dear friend, and he was treated like shit by the medical establishment. He was treated like he had leprosy. They wouldn't bring his food into his hospital room. They left it on a tray in front of the door. So I had a hard time sleeping at night. I would wake up in the middle of the night with that, what am I supposed to do? I have to do something, but what is that? And I went to a group of men who were sick in a room, somebody's apartment, and we all started a conversation. And I was the only one there who was healthy. And they thought that was really remarkable. They said, "What are you doing here?" And I said I wasn't sure. But I remember talking to friends of mine and told them that I was doing this, and they were horrified. "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "I don't know, but I have to do something. And I do care. I do care. I have to do something for Laszlo." And I really believed, I had a deep belief that I can't maintain health in a community that is sick. So this is altruistic, and it's also an attempt at self-preservation. And suddenly people were very interested, and they started coming in droves. So we had to leave that apartment. We went to a huge loft space on 14th Street. Then we had another loft space, one in Midtown and one downtown. And we had larger and larger spaces, and hundreds of people came out. I was leading, about maybe 80 people twice a week. And I was also holding down a full-time job in corporate America. So I was pulling this off. Then we started to create institutions, actually, organizations with a staff, bringing in some sort of professional expertise into this grassroots kind of social movement. So there was the gay movement, there was AIDS, there was a whole lot more going on. There was drug use, there was all kinds of pathologies. But I don't think, I think the creative drive, though, was not about solving problems. It was about love, beauty, truth, generosity, kindness. And those, when we're unleashed from our competitiveness, this neoliberal scheme where we have to fight over scant resources, we can be very generous and very imaginative. So I appreciate that Connolly recognizes in this book the gay movement, and he says we need to do something, we need to create we spaces like that. So thank you for that excellent question.
And I liked that the alternative word you offered to assemblage. Assemblage is a Deleuzian philosophical term. It's not even a good translation, according to some folks. I forgot what the actual word in French is, but the word in French doesn't connote a kind of static.
I use ensemble. I think,
that's right.
Yeah, that's right. A great assemblage comes out of Deleuze and somebody else. It's a good word, but I think Latour comes out of actor network theory, but I don't think it is.
I think ensemble is preferable to me because it's a musical metaphor. It's groups of people coming together and making music together. That suggests harmony. It suggests aesthetics. It suggests joy. It also suggests the kind of transmutational power that the arts have to take raw emotion or raw chaos and give it form and expression, and to filter it and process it, not to be too mechanical about that, because it's just very complex. But that's all I wanted to say. Actually, I think I mean more than that. Actually, let me say something else. I think what he's saying here is really important because he's kind of expanding the cosmology of struggle. Whereas I think that culturally, those in progressive movements have gotten used to focusing on the social. He's saying that we shouldn't exclude the social. We shouldn't exclude the construction of social reality and so forth. But we have to take into account that this stuff goes much deeper, much farther back. It's ultimately cosmic in the sense, not in a mystical sense, in a material sense. And so what came to mind reading this is an idea that came through Wilber, which is a very useful idea, I think, that has stayed with me. And that's his kind of holonic view of reality, where you have these different spheres of being. You have a physiosphere is the realm of geological forces, material forces, matter, energy, and so forth. That's all real. That's all present. But then out of the physiosphere, there's a biosphere, and that's all real and present and has different rules, different patterns than the physiosphere. But you can't have you can't have the biosphere without the physiosphere, because living organisms are made of molecules and atoms, which all follow physical laws. And then on that layer, sheath, sphere, I mean, this all comes out of, it's not Wilber really that it comes out of. It comes out of ancient Vedanta and so forth. The noosphere, the mental sphere, the mind. So that also has its own rules or its own patterns, which are more flexible than the biosphere and physiosphere. Like an atom can't choose not to obey atomic laws, but a human being can move all the atoms in his or her arm. Right? This is an example. And then an addition beyond that, which you don't find really talked about or integrated with the other spheres, is a spiritual sphere, a sphere of consciousness, a sphere, a theosphere. There are various, I think, ways of talking about that, but it gives you a cosmology to see that anything that happens, any process you're engaged in, any reality you're engaged in, is really an expression of all of these entanglements, and they're not kind of neatly layered, exactly like a two-dimensional graph on the page of a book would maybe have you believe. But when our politics gets kind of single sheathed, when we're only looking at the cultural or only looking at the biological or only looking at the climate and the larger planetary forces, I think we get a kind of myopia, and it becomes hard to form those trans-perspectival we spaces because we're all fixated on our particular view of reality. And that's what I think is useful about the integral views, the integral models and maps, is that they're trying to figure out how these different big pieces of the reality fit together. But I think in the practical sphere, like where we have to choose what to do, where to spend our time, how to obtain the resources we need, if that means money or whatever it means. That's where I think it gets a lot more difficult, because then we actually have to have the conversations about what we mean by our different points of view or theories or models or ways of languaging things and so forth. So I appreciate this conversation, and especially just the way it's being conducted, because I think that part of how we have conversations, not so much what we're talking about, but how we talk about it, is what creates that we-ness.
And I just want to add something, Marco, in response, because that tender sobriety I mentioned in the conversation that I had with Douglas, we are really good at numbing ourselves by the social narcotics, TV watching, couch potato forms of nihilism. Let's have another drink. let's smoke a joint, let's just bliss out. This is very much encouraged by our culture. And I believe it can become nihilistic. Now, I believe I'm drawing upon Nora Bateson and the conversations that I've had with Ryan and Doug in that group, because we're reading Bateson and Nora, Gregory and Nora, a daughter-father duo who are working in the field of ecology. But she says that we can't make meaning if we don't make sense. And there's that metaphor of the frog in the pot, and it starts to heat up. And the frog is in an artificial environment and doesn't notice in time that the water has started to boil. And that's a very deep metaphor. I think it was Bateson who came up with it for our situation, because there is besides the biosphere that you mentioned, there's a somatic intelligence. It's right here. There's a cognitive intelligence. It's right here. So it's the cognition and it's the somatic and the interplay, which will allow us to tap into our sense making, which then allows our cognition to function coherently rather than incoherently, as it does now in most people most of the time. So I believe, as I believe Nora does, let's not worry about making meaning. Let's learn how to make sense. And I believe, and I have some exercises that I don't want to do today, but I believe I would call them mind nature coordinating exercises. They're very gentle, very simple. And I did one of them with Doug and with Ryan in our Bateson group, because I believe we can become more sensitive somatically. And I believe Michael has studied a great deal of this too. Our somatic intelligence is incredibly impoverished in this flat screen world. And this is what we had in the 80s, a lot of, that we have much less of now, somatic intelligence. We were there, face to face. We reached out, we touched not just at the physical level, we touched at the mental level. We touched people on the other side of the planet. We used language in ways that activated other people who were not in close proximity to us. But we did that because we were grounded somatically. And I feel every day, in every way, we're losing it. And I think Nora says, yeah, what's liminal leadership when we're so impoverished? Now, I think we could have better maps. We can organize ourselves in much healthier ways, and we need those maps. We need that cognitive capacity. But I think we're overloading it with stuff that's not essential, and making a buck is probably not essential right now. We got better things to do with our time, the little time that we have left, by 2035. If we haven't turned this around, we're all going to be toast really soon. So thank you. And I hope I'm creating some paranoia here, because I hope I'm not the only one who's freaked out by this.
So I'm going to tie into what you said, John, and I appreciate because I have spent a lot of time in the somatic intelligence, and one of the reasons I was late is I suffer from chronic pain in my spine and my neck, and I wasn't going to get online until I did something to manage that. And I don't reach for pills or certain things. Probably the one thing I do reach for is food sometimes to numb myself. But instead, I took an hour walk before I came online. And in that entire time, I was working with whether I really wanted to come online, because it was overwhelming. And I personally feel part of the problem is in working with somatic intelligence and integrating it with the cognitive, and that is helping people understand that being overwhelmed can be intense, but it's a state. And there's ways, alternatives, even from spiritual teachings of how to work with the body. Reggie Ray is one of the best teachers for me to really give yourself permission to actually feel the sensations so that you can sense make. If you're not acknowledging your sensations, if you're numbing them, how can you sense make? And this is not to just say everything is about the body, but I agree that at this time in history of the human being, we've disassociated from a part of us that is actually a very whole. We've lost touch with the wholeness in a way by getting caught, like Gebster say, if I understand right, of just everything has to be done through the mental rational. I don't want to deny the mental rational, but poking fun at me because I know Ed and Mark find this funny, but you know, I was a bouncer in a coffee shop dealing with people not being in there and paying. You know, they just want to come in and sit. I was also worked things that happen at night, like strip tease or parties and stuff. And so at the time I was studying somatic intelligence and working with my trauma, I had a very concrete dojo in that coffee shop to work it. I'm still working it. But so this is all to say, John, that I think you and I are really, really parallel in this aspect, because you can't make good maps unless you feel you're in the territory and you can work with your feet on the ground in the territory. Territory has to come first before map making, in my sense. And sometimes the maps you've been given are outdated. They're outdated. Try going to San Francisco now and getting around. 10 years ago, I could get around. Now I don't know how to get around. I gotta get the new map. So that's where I stand with that. Thank you.
I'll briefly respond to the question Ed never really asked about the desert that comes up a couple times in the Prelude. That's going off of what Michael's saying, that these are old ideas that's being used to define our big picture, I suppose. So another way to use desert as opposed to just a wasteland, which perhaps he touches in on the desertification of certain climates and this and that, but I think he means it in the sense, at least in one of the ways he used it, I went back, and it's just like a situation or a story that's considered dull and uninteresting. So in a way, he's saying these stories are not really going to be the ones that define us now, perhaps. So in the book of Job, the story he uses, the old story, or the story of the cosmic God, the man in the clouds, defining the moral structure. He's paralleling that with strong humanism that define humans have the peak moral structure, perhaps, and that what we say and do is going to be what comes out above that of nature, or that of the powerful voice. And maybe you can respond to that, Ed.
Yeah.
At least that's how I interpreted it.
If you would all turn to page 2 of the text. Really, I was serious when I said I had trouble understanding just the sentence. And I'm very glad for what you just said, Doug, because what you said helps me to get a little closer to what he might be meaning. I just stumbled over this linguistically. So if we can just take a look at this. If you get down to to the next to the last, well, right below, there's a little quote that's where God roars, okay, or where Job roars, and he says, "You've turned against me." And in the paragraph right below it, right in the middle, there's a sentence that says, "But Job sees that if they were to admit that he does not deserve to be wretched, they would also jeopardize the comforting equivalence of their own well-being and the desert for it they project on the cosmos."
May I?
And yes, anybody. It was a general question of the group. Can somebody help me understand exactly what he said?
I think this is a variation on deserve. The desert, like a just desert, is what you deserve. So
thank you, Marco. That was my first guess. Now, can we turn to page 8? And on page 8, also lower half of the page, there's a paragraph that stops. Is Job now comforted because? Did you get there? And it's actually the next to the last sentence in that paragraph where he says, "Either way, he seems to me to contest any image that places humans at the top of a ladder of moral desert."
say desert. I think that's the way it's...
Well, dessert is spelled differently. See?
Well,
I think that's my... Is this just a typo? Is this
a homophone?
Huh?
It's a homophone. Dessert has two S's.
And dessert as a verb, yes. To desert as a verb and dessert. But he's not using it as a verb.
It's a term from moral philosophy, actually. Like your moral desert is the idea that, that effects that a subject accrues would be the result of past actions. So the idea being that the parallel between Job and Jehovah and modern humans and the climate, I think is what Connolly is attempting to draw. Do we deserve, what we're about to get, basically, I think is, and he's questioning whether we should.
And I did exactly that to make sense of it, but that's not what's there. I'm guessing this is a typo. They didn't have a real live editor read this.
Well, sometimes dessert is your dessert.
Yes, but it's spelled differently, Marco. Any way you look at it, it's spelled with 2 S's. When you eat, what after you have after dinner has 2 S's in it.
Correct.
I understand that being a little.
But this is not that. This is not the dessert. This is not the dessert after dinner. This is just what you deserve, and that is. And
it could be. It's our. We say the saying. Well, he got his just desserts.
Exactly.
We say that all the time.
But it's actually desert. It's not desserts. That's it. That is a bastardization, I think, of the concept. This. I'll leave it there, but let others help.
If we all got what we deserve, none of us would be here, really. But I'm really curious about, an old drag queen told me that. Actually, it was Quentin Crisp. Do you remember Quentin Crisp? He used to be a neighbor of mine. Anyway, I'm curious, and I hope something was learned by that. I wonder if Ryan, now that you got a feeling for this free-for-all kind of style on the Café, which is slightly different from the more scholarly approach that we've been taking in the Bateson, I wonder if, if you want to chime in, because I've noticed you have a lot of interdisciplinary studies as your field. So, and transdisciplinary. I think Bateson was an exemplar of the transdisciplinary. So I wonder if there's a relationship between interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and I think what that Connolly is trying to do here, which is hugely ambitious. But anyway, I would love to hear from you, Ryan, if you feel comfortable. If you don't, that's okay too.
I can chime in. I'd like that. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I'm relatively unfamiliar with William E. Connolly's work, but the idea of a modern non-sociocentric myth kind of resonated with my reading of Brian Thomas Swim. He's a evolutionary cosmologist, and he's come up with this narrative story of the cosmogenesis, and with Thomas Berry, and he kind of narrativizes the emergence of all those spheres that Marco was talking about, the physiosphere, the biosphere, the semiosphere, the noosphere, and he makes it into a compelling drama and narrative all the way to our modern political sensibilities and necessary political actions. And so I think that can really serve as a myth for our times, and a story that doesn't privilege the human, and it really it makes the nature the central subject of the narrative in all her forms. And I think he also instead of the Anthropocene, he has the bifurcation point between the Technozoic era and the Ecozoic era. And so I'm really interested in all these different formulations, and Donna Haraway has one as well with staying with the trouble. I think it's said Tulucene. So there's all these alternatives to the Anthropocene, and I think that's important if we're to make sense of our current predicament, or where we are right now, and just to see what are all the options that have been put on the table before we can really concretely make meaning. I've come to the Anthropocene literature a bit late. I know it was around maybe in the 80s, I think Connolly says, but I think there's still room for debate.
I mean, I think that's really interesting to get those alternative framings. Techno. There are a lot of thinkers who have been trying to conceptualize, like, what is this phase we're going through? What is this stage, or what is this transition? What happens next, and how do we as human beings, subjects, I guess the idea is, I mean, the political idea is, how do we get the desired result? Like, how do we get the world that we would prefer to live in? And that's one way of framing it. Part of what, I mean, I think a question, part of what we've discussed over and over again in these cafes and in other contexts is we've come down to the question, like, what do you want to have happen? What is your desire? Because we all have multiple desires. We have deeper desires, some more superficial. Our desires are often, I think, manipulated by the context in which we find ourselves culturally, economically, and so forth. I don't really want to work. I don't really want to write this proposal. If I didn't have to, in quotes, make money, our language is all enmeshed with a kind of, a mashup of ideological assumptions about what reality is and how it works and how we should interact with it. And there is, I think, a sense that this is a major crisis transformation point. Something is on the other side of it. We don't know what. And we want to have some influence on it. We want to have some agency in that scenario. So that's a big question, because this has been the question that we've been struggling with, we, the larger human community, for not just the last 500 years, but I mean, how deeply you want to go into the history, there's been a struggle against this sense that, against the whole. And there are multiple narratives for how that plays out. Peter Sloterdijk, who we also studied, has a voluminous narrative that begins with the mother and child as the primary relationship, and all the complexity of sphere making and intimacy kind of formation and group identity kind of coming out of those very intimate processes. But now in the Technozoic era, if we call it that, like, those processes are complexly interwoven with the products of the mind, the technologies that we have, the institutions that have developed, and to make sense of it all and to orient within the kind of frothing chaos, the very stressful chaos. I think that's how I experience it. Like, it's very deeply stressful to exist. That's urgent work. And so I think that that's part of what I get being here, listening to you all, and it's it's physical too. Like when I was listening to John and Doug speak earlier, their appetizer, it was calming to me, you know. And I don't mean that in a kind of narcotic effect. I mean that it kind of loosened some fixations in my attention. I'll just put it that way. And so this, I think, is part of if there's a politics to what we're doing, I think this is part of it. If there's a certain micro politics in how we can stay with the trouble that we find ourselves in. And so I still have to go and do my thing, but I'm appreciating that. Like, I'm appreciating them staying here with this trouble. Yeah, that's all I'll say. Thank you. Thanks, Ryan, too. Good to see you.
Can I respond real quickly to that? Because he brought up 2 points that I think are important. One of them is, I like that you said that the video that Doug and John did had a calming effect. I immediately thought that you meant exactly what you meant when you meant that. And it's not a narcotic, it's simply, it takes a little bit of the edge off the tension. And that edge off the tension we feel in our bodies. So, and this was a purely flat screen, cyber mediated exchange. So, and I believe that's real. I watched that as well. I don't have a lot of the anticipation that a lot of you folks do. I'm much more apathetic than I used to be when I was young, or some people call it curmudgeon-y, but whatever it might be. I don't think we're losing the things that, and this is no criticism, John, this is simply an observation. And Michael's the same way. I don't think we're losing the somatic as much as some of you think we might be. Because again and again, we see evidence of the fact that it's there. On the other hand, I don't think that we were all that somatic beforehand, because I think we brought all of our bad habits into cyberspace. I think we had them before. I think we're just expressing them through this medium instead of another one. Yes, there was a lot of face-to-face because we had to. We went down the street. We got the loft set up down on 14th Street because we were able to find it. But what we didn't have when you got the loft down on 14th Street was that regionality that I think I hear Connolly talking about. And that regionality takes on a new dimension when you think about where we're all sitting right now. You know, because all you guys are over across the pond and I'm over here, but you guys are also spread out across the continent as well. So, you know, that's a pretty big region to be talking about. And so I'm not taking region, I've only read the introduction so far in this book, but I'm not taking that region to be a geographical delimitation. I'm taking that region to be something else. And I'm sure he's intimating it that just from what I read, I get the impression he's looking at it in different terms. But there's also going to be a dimension of this that's going to be specifically geographical, I'm sure. Because I'm not exactly sure how we manage all that we want to manage just this way that we're doing it now. So that's what I wanted to just kind of dovetail on that.
Yeah, well, Ed, I want to kind of push back on you with your description of somatic, and no, I think we haven't had a good education of the somatic intelligence of the body. That's my pushback. We have not had a good education. And this medium is forcing us into, I think, a more in-depth education, let's put it that way. I mean, the only education I understand before I had my trauma was physical ed in high school. Now, come on, that doesn't tell you much other than you're going out to compete, or, you know, they're trying to make you healthy, but there's no interior working with when you're overwhelmed from stress or tension. You know, that it is a reality. I mean, even face to face. I mean, that's what I came face to face with when I was trying to tell certain people that were over intoxicated, you need to chill out. And then physically feeling they didn't like what I was telling them. So I had to go do my best impression of a Zen master and not kick the living shit out of them because they're giving me an attitude. You know, sir, please, come on. I understand, but you know, you just grabbed somebody's ass and they didn't like it. So I think my bias in my experience along somatic comes from that kind of engagement. And what I see because of that is a lot of people, when I walk out in the world, not being aware of that, not taking that in consideration when they do interact with a salesman or, quote, this is really important to me, the way people interact with homeless people. So, you know, that's just my little pushback against you, Ed.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm being pushed back on. I agree with what you're saying. The point, even when we were, the point that you first made, that we never have really been raised to understand our somatic reaction in those terms. When I'm a kid and you feel bad, and you know, my dad would tell me, you know, get over it. Mm. That was his reaction. Okay, right, so right. That's the, because I felt bad. Well, the feeling was obviously a physical feeling. It's right. There. See? Right. So his reaction, we'll get over it. All right. Now that might not be the optimal somatic education that we need. I agree. Okay. But that was how a lot of it happened face to face. And when I really enjoy that we can get together and talk about these things in the way that we do talk about them, because as you keep pointing out, and this is the, you know, one of the things that you really add to this, out in the world, most people don't think like we do. They don't stop to talk like we do. They don't interact all the time like we do here. I mean, we don't act like this all the time. We act like this when we're here. I know a lot of times I act when I'm not here. Okay, and in everyday situations where it might be thereafter that I did something, I said, oh, I should have probably taken Michael's advice and been a little more in touch with my my gut reaction on that one, and I wouldn't have, you know, took a swing at the guy, you know. Not that I'm taking swings at guys around here, but I don't have to do that. But it's that kind of thing. Of course, it's after the fact, and this is very helpful. Yeah, it's very helpful. But the majority of people that we're dealing with aren't approaching this in any way, shape, or form like we are. We're a very privileged group. Well, and able to do this. Yeah. I also want to say you gave a good, but a lot of it was what helped me wasn't just a physical reaction that I want to hit somebody. It was engaging this muscle in my jaw. How do I talk back? How do I speak to them? And there's a fine line sometimes, and it's situational. Sometimes you have to give them space and work with it. Other times, no. I've been in situations where the way I cut it is, I'm going to get vocally drill sergeant on your ass, and because you're being a freaking pill. So here, feel this. And most of the time, if I had to do that, there was no physical violence, but the voice can be a powerful thing to neutralize if used skillfully. And that's an art form, I'll say. It's an art form, but I've been in the military. I've been yelled at. I've been tore apart from my ex-wife, who was very good at sarcasm. So I've received it and I've given it. And so I just want to add that the way we use this is just as physical as the way when we punch somebody. Just to add that in the mix.
Yeah, I want to add something to that too. Riffing on Michael and Ed. We haven't lost our somatic intelligence. I may have over-exaggerated, if that's what you got, Ed, from what I was saying. I think we've distorted it more than we ever have before. Probably in the history of humanity. And very quickly, too. It's happened in one generation. So I think the distortions of looking at heads in little cells stacked on top of each other, as has happened in some of these calls when they get recorded, and I see these individual half a dozen cells, heads inside these, trapped in these little cells, stacked on top of each other. It reminds me of what Foucault called the panopticon, you know, where the masters could see you, but you can't see them, and you're all arranged in ways that are transparent to the master. And it's sort of the Cartesian nightmare is now, you know, stamped upon us by this technology. I think we can use the technology in a more humane and sensory kind of sensitive way. And Doug and I, it was one head talking at a time, one face, you know, gestures, the eyes, the windows of the soul, and then it would go to the other speaker. And I would love it if we would make that a habit in these large groups, that we don't stack the little talking heads on top of each other. It, as an audience member, it destroys affect. It gets flatter and flatter and flatter, which doesn't represent the actual experience of being here together. And so I think how I brought this up previously, how do we consider an audience as we're presenting our ideas in these forums? I think it's extremely crucial. And the aesthetics is, I think, should be front and center in all of our attentions. Because we're right now, you know, with the Trump shutdown just behind us, and another shutdown promised in a few weeks from now, I think we're in, you know, I think that the nihilists, I'm calling Trump and Pelosi, I think both of them are nihilists. I don't think one is, and I think we're all, dominated by this kind of nihilism that runs very deep in our culture. So I hope that we can use this technology in more creative ways to engage the social, I think what they call the social engagement system. I think the polyvagal system, the vagus nerve, which runs throughout our nervous system, and it goes into our eyes and into our voice. And we can sense when another person is socially engaged with us and has entered the zone with us, the vagus nerve has been activated. But many of us have had trauma. And we were in situations where someone beat the shit out of us. It could have been a parent, could have been a caregiver. And that does get into your nervous system. But I think recently we've discovered that with certain kinds of therapies, certain kinds of the somatic intelligence can get reactivated. We've had these conversations, Michael and I, working with Reggie Ray. I've worked with Reggie Ray as well. And I believe that there's a lot of evidence that we can heal these disturbances. And we can be released from these traumas, but not all trauma is bad. Some trauma actually opens up all kinds of gifts. That I was attacked at a very early age. I was able to float up to the ceiling and look down as they beat the shit out of me. What a blessing that was. And then when the beating stopped, I could float back down into my body. This became very useful as a gay man, as an adult. People were throwing rocks at me, spitting on me, calling me a faggot, almost every day. Not everybody threw rocks at me every day. That didn't happen as often. But I was called faggot just about every day. And, you know, I had to go out and make a living in this sick system. And I had to be extremely aware of very, very subtle communications on many different levels. And that's become a gift. I'm sick. I just turned 65 yesterday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. And I didn't get here because I wasn't paying attention to my environment. I paid exquisite attention to my environment. But that's why I feel like we're in deep shit, because we don't know where we are.
Well, John, one thing I want to say about the polyvagal nerve that I think ties into your emphasis on the affect, it is only on the right side. It doesn't come down, there's not a complementary. And they made a point about that it's on the right side where the affect is, comes down here. So Reggie makes a point that he's not trying to get us to do away with the left side that's rational, but to bring more lateral balance. But the only way to do that is the rational side, you've got to, oh, it's okay, baby. You can take, it's not, you got to kind of soothe the rational side, and because it's part of its job is to protect us, to tell you the truth. Part of the rational side is to rationally, or the rational decision to protect may be irrational, but it's a decision. Let's put it this way: the rational side makes a decision to jump back at somebody, so sometimes you have to soothe that without teaching it that you're not doing away with it, but you're including more.
That's right. That's right. So you work with those polarities.
Yes, polarities, yeah.
You acknowledge where you are now. I see this, I sense this, and there's this.
Yes,
and
right.
Sense this, and we can sense that at the same time.
Right.
And I'm glad you told me that because I have felt somatically, I'm getting rewired.
Yes, you are.
And but it's in a good way. The left and the right are changing. Right. And I feel it most at night. When I'm sleeping, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, and there's a tremendous shift that's happening. And it's happening, it's starting the left side of my body and in the back. Mm-hmm. And I know this sounds weird, but it felt like I was being touched. Mm-hmm. And I was being touched from an intelligence that is much greater than my ego. And it was benevolent, and it's moving energy. It's moving energy. I can do certain practices which can amplify it, and probably that's been necessary. I learned a lot of that from Reggie Ray. Those old Vajrayana practices, those monks up in the mountains, they were having a great time moving this energy around. And we can do that too. But I don't think we need the mythical baggage. And I believe that Reggie Ray is sort of bringing that forward, that these ancient healing systems aren't going to work if we can't reinvent them.
Right.
To work in our postmodern, pluralistic.
We need to kind of honor the old ideas, but how do they come forward? Because there's gems in that lineage. There's gems, but I agree. We don't need to get caught in all the cultural baggage, but at the same time, I want to a certain degree, respect the cultural baggage in a way.
That's right. That's right. I so agree.
So what I'm hearing right now, and maybe I'd like to try 30 seconds of silence before I talk. So if everyone will just step into some mode of quietness right now. And Ed noted, and Marco noted, kind of the soothing effect of the face-to-face, even within these little frames that we have here. And the ability to take alternate narratives. And what I see, if we were to take this into the political realm and also tie in ancient traditions, ancient thoughts, is a loaded term, perhaps. The more I've thought about it as I was listening is the concept of mindfulness. And there's been books written about mindfulness in politics, various forms of what mindfulness means to individuals. Some take the scientific route and say, well, if we introduce mindfulness in schools, in education, in politics, then that is soothing to the body, that's soothing to the dialogue that's going on, or wasn't going on beforehand. So if we were to imagine two political figures in a political debate, the year 2020 is coming up, and somebody just saying, here, let's have a moment of silence while we actually collect our thoughts and not worry about this moderator or what we're saying to anybody, and actually have a real dialogue. That's not going on in too many spaces. And what we've kind of picked up on here, the ability to have just our heads and maybe our top torso, it's a certain form of maybe the rational. It is a little bit of the scientific rational coming through, that we're able to maybe focus on what we're saying here, to have deeper conversations and not get physical about it. That's just one brief theory, but that I see this introduction of a new way of thinking, even something as simple as mindfulness, however you interpret it, or the pause, or a moment of silence. It's done in stadiums before the game begins, I guess, but I don't know if anybody has thoughts of what the moment of silence really means, or it's forgotten once the games begin. So it needs to be carried throughout the conversation, throughout the discourse.
That was beautifully said, Doug. I just want to add something. Silence is great, but I think it was either Wallace Stevens or some poet said, you don't get far with silence. Silence is necessary, and certainly soothing. And I can sense that soothing is a quality that you have in abundance. And I can also sense that you might get sad and angry and anxious. And you can be soothing and you can be sad at the same time. We don't have to prefer silence to conversation, to other forms of activity. And I believe that silence, when it comes naturally in a dialogue or trialogue, is riveting. There's a lot of processing going on in silence. But if we're ringing a bell and demanding that everyone be silent, that's okay too, if you want to enter into a ritual space. And when you come out of a ritual space, ring a bell, letting everybody know, now you have to go back to your job or whatever activity of the day is. Bring that quality of soothingness with you. So we need to learn how, I agree, we need to learn how to soothe our systems. We also have to, other people can tell us, could you tone it down, please, so I can feel relaxed and calm. I think that will be fatal if we make that demand on other people. So this is our challenge, I believe, working with these flat screens. We have voices, we have faces, we have eyes. I think all of you are beautiful people. And I can really enjoy the aesthetic pleasure of being together with you. But I think it's very important that we honor the Gnostic voices that want to come through. And if we block them because they make us uncomfortable, or we don't feel soothed properly, I think we're going to miss golden opportunities to learn something. So I'm just sharing that. Thank you.
I'm really glad you did, John, but I wanted to come back to something that you had said earlier about all the little people in the little cells. I unlike you, I always have that multi-cell view on my screen, because when you're talking, I'm devoting my attention to you, but I can't help but be curious as to how everyone else is reacting to it besides myself. So I want to be able to see everybody. I don't want to just see the person talking, which is great. And that's where I want to devote most of my attention, but I got to have the other feedback as well. And I find that I was very privileged to spend a lot of years in the classroom. I didn't have people sitting in rows and columns in front of me, where we were generally in dynamic groupings or in circles or whatever it was, depending. And it was very important that when you're the one that has to be speaking and you're speaking to the group, it's, for me, exceedingly important to see how everyone is reacting. I want to know. I'm never offended when somebody's falling asleep, but it tells me something. And it tells me something very important. And the person over here who's laughing hilariously, you can tell he's biting his tongue, also tells me something. And without having the going to sleep and the biting tongue at the same time, everybody just kind of blends into a mass, and I can retain some individuality amongst those. So I enjoy, you know, it's like you said, the aesthetics should be in the foreground. I agree with you 100%. I just want that magnified over 6 or 7 instead of 1.
I've seen people on the verge of tears because of some affective zone they've reached. And I look at another head and they're munching on popcorn. And then someone else is going to the bathroom. And someone else is, you know, getting up and making up a cup of coffee. I think maybe there are things that are more important to be paying attention to than all of that. And that's why I said the affective zone, which I grant you, that's a driver for me. I feel it gets flattened by irrelevant distractions. Now, if there are distractions that are important, that would be great, but they don't flag themselves. And most of that stuff I don't think is terribly relevant to high quality discourse events. However, that's a difference. You and I have a difference. And that's maybe a difference that makes a difference. It may not make any difference at all. Who knows? But I think it's good that we put those differences out there and let the system organize. Unfortunately, I think when we videotape these events and they're posted on YouTube, a choice has to be made before they get uploaded. And that's why I've been advocating, let's have one face, one voice at a time, rather than having, 10 heads, doing things that are picking their nose or running up and down, cooking supper. I think it's just fragmenting and dissociating us even more than we already are. But, I think there's something to be said for telepresencing. I think Ryan mentioned that earlier. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think when we do get in the zone with each other and our somatic intelligence is activated and we go out into the street, we may be bringing some of that communication, healthy communication with us into the street. That would be great. But I don't have much evidence for that happening, actually. I tend to enjoy these conversations. I go out in the street and I usually have a temper tantrum really fast with somebody. So I don't know how much of it is, is transferring to other areas in my life, but I wish all of us the best of luck.
Well, and I just want to say, because I started this conversation, I think that all of us needs to take personal responsibility of how we engage this new medium. And part of engaging that new medium is, for me, is grounding myself on this side of the screen. And I'm kind of in between you and Ed, John, as far as that difference. I'm kind of in between because I can see Ed's point, and I definitely, on the effective side, hear your side. And that's why I took my time today, because I know my nervous system was at a point before I got on that I didn't want to bring that kind of performance anxiety to the screen, because when my nervous system gets jacked up like that, it turns into a performance anxiety, and I've just been paying attention to that. So I make the decisions of how I engage with people. I don't always do it perfect. Sometimes I have to come back and apologize, but one thing I like about my practice, I've developed a deep quality of resilience that's very important for trauma people, as far as I'm concerned, to touch into that quality of being resilient while you're working with your trauma.
Oh, I'm going to leave in just a moment to get back focused on what I should be doing, what I should have gotten done. I've gotten terribly off course today. But I'm glad, and I wouldn't have if I wasn't listening to my body, wasn't listening to more subtle cues about what might be important for me to pay attention to today. I think mindfulness in that sense is very, very important. And I think that being mindful around digital technologies is extra important because they're so neurologically potent. And I agree with both Ed and John on the question of what's going on with respect to our embodiment in the techno-digital age. Like the split between mind and body, or spirit and body, predates modern technology. Right? This is already it's a gift of our, some of our religious traditions and other metaphysical assumptions. Right? But at the same time, the technology is developed to be so powerful, and this is a power that's set within bigger powers, larger contexts, larger forces. All that given, nonetheless, when you have more, let's say half or more of the human population on the same social media network at the same time, for example, and then the messages that those brains, all those billions of brains, are receiving is being manipulated by particular actors, whether those are official in the sense of working for the corporation or rogue, working for any other entities. And the whole system is so skewed and deformed and kind of out of sync with organic human needs, and are really oriented towards very, I think, at least from my perspective, perverse needs, vast accumulations of unnecessary resources while, many people struggle. This is, this is, I think, is unprecedented, at least from this perspective. Like, I don't know what's going on in the larger cosmic history as far as different beings, entities, etc. I think that the version of history that we have is limited. So I'm fairly open to many possibilities on that level, but being mindful in how we interact across these interfaces, I think, is really important. And one of the practices that I'm not perfect at, but that I've tried to bring when we do these talks, is not like to pick my nose and do other random things. Sometimes I have to let my dog out or whatever, but like the listening is just as important as the speaking in these contexts, especially. And even though we don't have the full physical embodiment, and we have to rely on this very kind of narrow bandwidth telepresence, I think that we nonetheless can sense when there's when the other is listening or not, when there's presence or not. So that active listening, that active presence, and that mindful interaction or interfacing affects the quality of the whole dialogue. And I think that different groups are different in terms of how they choose to focus and whether they're more contemplative or more discursive. But I like that. I like that we can be intentional without being too kind of rigid in terms of how we bring our minds together and bring our brains into an ensemble to make sense of the events and the information and the stories that we're being exposed to through living in this kind of environment that we do. So I'm going to go and hopefully do some good writing today, and I will look forward to catching up next time, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Marco.
Just remember, Marco, if you wait to the last minute, it only takes you a minute to do it.
That seems to have been true in my life. So I even wait till after the last minute. And it seems like I've saved all that time that I could have spent working on it. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good luck with the proposal. Good luck with what you have to do. If I could pick up on something that was said along right at the very beginning of our conversation, when you have 3 children and they're growing up, they're all adults now, and they all have families of their own. So I get to look at this from a very detached point of view. But one of the phrases that I continually hear, even to this day, and I live in a house with one of my daughters and their husband and the grandkid, but the other one's there. I hear very often, "I don't deserve this." And this comes in a part back to Job. That's why I asked. Job's my favorite book in the Bible. I love Job. I did my religious education exam on Job, much to the chagrin of my examiners. The first statement said to me in the exam was, "You made me read something again I haven't read in 20 years." I said, "Well, I'm glad I could be of service." But at any rate, and what they often say, and it comes up all the time, "I don't deserve this." It could be the kid misbehaving. It could be something that happened at work. "I don't deserve this." And the only thing that I've ever told them, for as long as I've known them, is you never, ever, ever get what you deserve. You only ever get what you need. And I believe that's to a very great extent. I understand there's a lot of things that happen in life. John, you can attest to this, that are so unjustified, so unreal, so nonsensical, so insane, that we have trouble imagining what they are. And the only reason I keep sticking to the saying is, every time you tell us about that, every time you tell us about what's happened to you at some time, you also always add at the end, and this is the part I like the most about it, what you got out of it. Yeah, there's always like there's a point. There's a point. There's a moral to the story. There's a statement that's being made. And when I hear that, for all of the disgust and pain and horror that I feel when you're telling the story, I'm going, yeah, but he got something he needed, and he's not now. You have the opportunity in a situation like this, in a group like this, to share that, which I find exceedingly beneficial and exceedingly helpful. So that's that. I just wanted to add that's my standard line to shut the kids up. You only ever get what you need. I just wanted to add that.
That sounds like a Rolling Stone song.
It doesn't matter where we get our influences, does it?
You only get what you need.
Thank you, Ed. I believe that our stories, when a story is driven by the group dynamic, I believe our stories can be very beneficial. If I'm just kvetching about some shitty thing that happened today, I don't see any value in that. Although sometimes I do that. But that's not when I'm at my best. And I do believe that the story is so important for entering into the weave of the system, of our social systems, and our ability to carry across from domain to domain to domain, and finding what's happening in between those domains that's useful. The patterns that connect, I think, is what Gregory Bateson said, is really, really important. And I think stories and our myths come out of those liminal zones. But I think that we shouldn't confuse the liminal zones with the liminoid. The liminoid is the products of those liminal zones. And those vary from culture to culture. And tribal cultures, and I think Job comes out of a tribal culture. Job falls apart and he comes back together again. And he learns some humility, a deeper humility, perhaps, than at the beginning of this story. But I think that comes from a very tribal kind of mythos. And that's very different from the post-industrial complex that, you know, the military industrial complex that we're in. I think that we have confrontations with those liminal zones, but we turn them into Netflix, you know, which is, I watch Netflix when I have nothing else to do. And it used to be really interesting to me now. Now it just seems to me more and more narcissism and necrophiliac kind of behavior. I mean, it's just so gross, people killing each other and shooting each other. So I just feel the nihilism is passive and active forms of it are just rampant just about everywhere, except here. You know, I feel like we're very alerted to that, and also giving a chance for someone else who's had a breakthrough or a close breakdown to bring that to a group that's sensitive to that. It's a great blessing that we give to one another to give that kind of quality of attention, which I've received from many of you very often. So I want to express my gratitude for this space and hope we can maintain this quality of attention. Thank you.
A phrase I just ran across from Stephen Jenkinson was the eloquence in the ear and on the tongue. The eloquence, and he's not saying it's fancy and stuff. It's because he also adds in that phrase that it's about, are we willing to, I can't remember, but it goes along with stay with the trouble and not ignore it. And be willing to hear the trouble, be willing to be aware of how we're talking about it, because how we speak the world into existence is important. And I don't want to get rigid about that, because sometimes I think a good shout is needed, you know. But I do see two extremes of either people shouting over somebody or people not maintaining the power of the spoken word to talk back. They just want to avoid because of the messiness, the trouble. And I run into more people that I'm trying to nurture with my example. Stop avoiding speaking. Find a way to, you know, yeah, you have to use discernment. You know, I'm not going to go up against fucking Trump. Fuck you, Trump. I don't want to talk to you because you're not going to even listen, you know? But I can say that to him, but I have some friends that think along the lines of Trump, that they're real people. And I want to do my best to create a space, given if I'm in the right space in my interior, to try to have a dialogue. And that's a discerning moment.
I love the silence. It sometimes give me courage. Sometimes it creates anxiety, and a little of both. I have something. I hope this is relevant. I do believe it is, and I'm just drawing upon the history of the Café. We've had many conversations, many different things we've talked about. But I think materialism and neoliberalism and nihilism. I don't want to lump them all together. But the exceptional, human exceptionalism, I think these are all, and sociocentrism, these are all terms that William Connolly's been using. I just wanted to quote something. This comes from physics, and the materialism and the new materialisms that are arising as well, because there are a lot of people who call themselves materialists who are having trouble now with materialism, and they're trying to reorganize some of their thinking. But I'm just drawing upon two physicists who wrote this book, The Transcendent Mind, and I just wanted to quote one paragraph, which I think may be significant. And they're talking about materialism and the different versions of reality. They say, and about materialism, they're saying, first of all, it is scalable in that indivisible atoms of which everything is made are assumed to be governed by the same laws that apply to people-sized events. It is deterministic in that all activity is the result of predictable interactions of atoms with one another. It is objective in the sense that these atoms behave as they do independently of anyone's observation of them. It is reductionistic in that people-sized events, including people, consciousness, and so on, are thought to be ultimately nothing but the activity of indivisible atoms. It depends on an absolute space and on an absolute time. And they say, so we have scalable, deterministic, objective, and reductionistic model of reality depends on the existence of absolute space and time. And each of these 6 prongs of historical materialism has been pretty much dismantled by now. So it's all bullshit. And these are physicists. They go on to conclude, there is nothing clear. They said physics does not speak with a single voice. There is no clear agreement on much in physics. Contemporary physics has come apart with tension arising between relativity and quantum theories and considerable disagreement about the fundamental nature of physical reality. So I believe there is a relationship between the physics, the materialist discourse, dogma, actually, I think would be closer, and what's happening now. I think there are many thoughtful practitioners of physics and biology who are in culture, who are trying to figure this out together, something that works better. So I'm just bringing that out there because I think we've allowed physics to dominate so much of our reasoning, and we don't realize that it's not reasonable at all. And I think the same thing goes with a lot of the biology based on, you know, Crick and Watson and the DNA and the selfish meme. The selfish meme. I think that's a really bad metaphor that sort of hooks into the sort of materialist physics, and the neoliberal drive to conquer and divide and to dominate and to be the ultimate predator. That's where I think a lot of our human exceptionalism comes from. And I think it's going to lead to disaster because without an environment, you know, how is our species going to make it? And also there's the somatic intelligence that is produced by an individual, not by the genome. It's produced by the individual, and the individual learns through the soma, the psyche soma, and the environment. And of course, we are constrained by the group genetics. It's not my individual genes that are calling the shot that I'm constrained by. It's the genome of the entire group. And that genome operates at a different time span than my individual somatic intelligence does. So I think these are the kind of things, these kind of subtleties of the in-between culture and nature and biology and physics that we're, the selfish meme, the selfish gene, neo-Darwinian view, which is, being debunked quite a bit right now. I think it obscures these very subtle kinds of interplays between the phenotype and the genotype. And I'm not a biologist, by the way, nor am I a physicist. I'm just a guy who reads a lot. I'm trying to figure, and I go to the experts and I listen to them, and they disagree about everything. So I think it's up to us as people who are interested in the transdisciplinary or the interdisciplinary to try to go into the in-between and try to ask better questions. And I think the experts appreciate it, actually, because it challenges them to talk to others who may be laypersons but are outside of that discipline, who can bring some fresh insight into their quandaries. So I'm just sharing that with you guys. Hope that stimulates something. Thank you.
I don't. Did you want to go ahead, Ed? Go ahead.
We're stimulating from the beginning, actually. The only point of contention, if you want to even call it that, I would say it's not all bullshit, but a lot of it appears as bullshit because a lot of it is bullshit, but not all of it's bullshit. I'm not going to take that last step. And one of the reasons is sometimes it can be very helpful in the domain that they operate in, that they only see for themselves. They've done a lot and accomplished a lot. That they can't agree on what they've accomplished is more their problem than mine. Because I'm allowed as an outsider like you to go in there and pick and choose what seems to fit, the greater narrative. One of the things that, I read through the Prelude before I ordered the book. And one of the things in there is where he said he wants to write a new myth or create a new myth, or he wants to go down a narrative path in order to help us not get over those misunderstandings. They're going to come anyhow. But I find that it makes a lot more sense to a lot more people if you can tell the story about it than if you simply recite the laws and show the equations, because that really doesn't tell you anything if you're not of that ilk, so to speak. That limits it too much. I also found, Dawkins, who's probably one of the most insane materialists on the planet, comes up with a metaphysical metaphor to describe his own, he refutes himself in his statement. And those things, okay, well, if you have no other way to do it, then I guess you have to do it that way. Because it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like you said, there's so many other factors that are impinging upon the entire get together. I have my parts to do in all of this, but I'm not the determiner of the fate of mankind, on the other hand, either. I'm only a contributor to that. And being able to, let's say, put these into some kind of context that makes a richer sense for me is what's important. That's what I get out of these discussions. So I didn't want to interrupt you, Michael.
No, actually you articulated a similar point of view that I was going to say, but I'd say it this way: is I'm constantly working with the overwhelm of the multitude of perspectives that seem to come out of all this knowledge. But that's something I've learned to be okay with, so that once I take responsibility for the overwhelm and settle down and know that I may not solve humanity's, where we're going, but I can take responsibility of how I contribute to humanity talking on this forum and when I go out in the street. That's the best fucking thing I can do. And that's all I have to offer, is keep my mind open, keep my heart open, keep my feet on the ground, and do the best, because the big reality is there's a lot of shit out of my control. And I don't get enough sex, so that's a problem too.
I don't know how to respond to that, but I think a key word that when Johnny was trailing off at the end there, or finishing up, he mentioned the experts, and to identify. I've always been the anti-expert, even if I was to pursue something beyond, or like a PhD or beyond that. I don't think I could ever consider myself an expert. And for someone to consider themselves an expert in a field seems counterintuitive because it's so limiting. And that's really all I wanted to say about that. But yeah, I might have a authority figure problem there myself, but for anyone to claim expertise is a certain sign of character, perhaps. Clearly, there are experts in certain fields, but even if you are an expert in a certain field, to have to say that, then you're introducing a little bit of excess ego, I believe. There is information of your specific field that will inform the various other fields.
I think that's a point well noting, Doug, because those people who actually have something to say, who could be, by some measures, considered experts, never call themselves that. They always, Bateson is a prime example. The man is brilliant. He's got lots of good thoughts. You can just sit in awe, reading. Can't talk about reading what he's written, but he never once claims in any way, shape, or form that he's got like the answer to even a small question or a side question. Or it's always, well, it kind of looks like this, and we did this, and it kind of points in that direction, and maybe we'll look some more. And they're continually looking. Einstein was the same way. The people who really know what they're talking about have serious reservations about their own knowledge and ability to talk about it because they know it's incomplete.
But at the same time, they have a lot of enthusiasm, and I think.
Well, you got to have passion to put your nose to the grindstone that long. I can tell you.
But I only want to bring that in along with yours. Is sometimes when people interact with them, they have trouble with their not parsing their enthusiasm with them being humble at the same time. Certain people that engage. I've noticed certain people that engage with people that I can tell have enthusiasm, like Bateson has enthusiasm and not an expert, that other people that are listening to him, they're not feeling the enthusiasm. They're just channeling it as being arrogant. That's just a side note along the way.
When you live in a land like I do of German professors.
Okay.
Believe me, you get that a lot. Well, and this is, I'll just say, for the most of the group, Ryan hasn't been partial to this because he wasn't part of the Sloterdijk get-togethers, but Professor Sloterdijk is exactly that to me. He just sounds like a professor. He talks like a professor. He acts like a professor, and I don't like professors. I have a problem with professors. Okay. Even if I were one myself, I'd have a problem with myself. I'd have to.
Well, I'm probably coming from a shadow that I've been highly enthusiastic about a lot of things, and I always get pushback. You're sounding like an expert. No, I'm enthused about this idea. Aren't you?
Right. Well, as my dad once told me, not everybody's enthused about the same things as you are.
And that's what I've had to learn.
I guess we're getting close to the end of our session today. So I've learned a whole lot. I'd have to think about what it is I've learned, but I think just bringing forward some of these complex ideas in a public space, recognizing that I can revise it at any time is a great blessing. So I hope we continue to do this. And and this may be something unique in human history, where people can gather together on different continents, and go into these liminal spaces together, in these in-between spaces. And we don't have to re-traumatize ourselves or each other. We can find high levels of rapport, and we may be doing higher levels of rapport here through this technology than we would if we were hanging out at happy hour, the corner club, which is not necessarily the most exalted experiences available to humanity. I speak from experience as someone who at one time loved bar culture, but now it's, even if you go out to a bar, almost nobody's talking to each other. They're looking into their, into their device. So it kind of gets kind of creepy. But at any rate, I'm just sharing that with you guys. This may be a very a rare opportunity in our human discourse events. So I like that we've been doing this for over a year now, and there's a core group, and new friends emerge and start to share. And I believe that this is a great opportunity. I hope we could do more of this and can do it better.
Well, John, I can speak from my heartfelt experience that this cafe is like an island of sanity to me. It's really an island of sanity because of the way that we really, I feel, since I've been on, do our best to practice just as much of how are we communicating rather than just trying to talk over each other but be open to each other at the same time. And so I've said this before on the cafe, even when, a few months after I was visiting it, I do my best to take this out into the street of how I communicate when I'm feet on the ground with people, listening better, not getting as defensive, being one thing that these conversations, this cafe has helped is to actually engage in and accept fluidity, the fluidness of conversation. It's a different, there's a different calibration when I'm in front of somebody than here, I would agree, but there's still that ability to bring fluidness within conversation that it's helped me tremendously enlarge my sanity because, earlier today, it was my chronic pain in my back and neck, but I also know that part of it was this whole shutdown and the people being affected, because I'm a firm believer we need to acknowledge we're affected by the planet and what's going on in this country, and you have to take responsibility for yourself of how you're going to process that. Don't push it away, work with it. It's workable, but it's a skill set to learn how to work with it. So thank you, everybody.
And it was great to participate in this Cosmo Cafe for the first time. I was kind of eager to explore what it would be like and have a conversation that's loosely tied to the reading in a more informal setting than the Bateson group. And I found I really enjoyed it, even though I didn't say as much as I usually do. I found that for me, the new environment was very enriching, and I did learn a lot. But like John, I'd have to think about what I really did learn to really be able to conceptualize it, because I think there was a lot of rich dialogue today. And I think that the informal structure and the loose tie to the reading really allows for a lot of in-between topics and a lot of discussion that wouldn't normally arise, but which is really integral to the human condition and where we are right now and what's coming forward from the collective in each of our lives. So it's great to be participating. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here.
And your telepresence is very communicative. even when you're not speaking. I felt your presence. So thank you so much. And look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Thank you.
And I don't have a closing statement other than next week, Ed will be putting together something. I think as we speak, he posted, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. That'll be posted on the Infinite Cosmos Café channel there. So check it out on Infinite Conversations. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Ed?
Yes, it's. I wanted to dovetail off of the last two cafes, and so and decided I wanted to make it a little more real, a little more concrete. I wanted us to talk about the things that we hate to talk about, and that's money and power, and how that all fits together. And so the whole idea is to take another look at like the economics and the politics that are so ever present in our lives. And we very often, for whatever reasons, sometimes it's good not to have to engage the Trump supporters. Sometimes it's good not to have to run through, why Merkel should have stepped down, 14 years ago, as prime minister and whatever those may be. But to really bring everything that we've learned in these cafes and the things that we're talking about. And Connolly was, when I read that, the Prelude, he was one of the people that kind of inspired me to get down that path, because he's a political scientist at heart. And so he's looking for different ways to how do we do this, not politically in the sense of party politics and whatnot, but how do we do that in the interaction with one another that is not necessarily social, that kind of dimension that comes into it. So those are the kinds of things that, I'd like to touch upon. I put the page up right before I came online. So there is there's teaser text and there's a little bit of explanation. Anybody's free to add, subtract, multiply, or divide anything that's there. It's a wiki, isn't it? So if you have more questions that you'd like to add, you're free to do that as well. I tried to put a couple up there to help stimulate our thought, but I really appreciate everybody who can showing up and bringing what they know from how they know it to bear on the topic itself. Okay, and that's more my hope than anything else. So that's coming up next week.
I'm really looking forward to that, Ed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John.
So I'll see you guys next time.
Great.
Take care.
Yep. It was good having you, Ryan. Glad you were here. Do come back.
I will. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Everybody.
Have a great week.
Enjoy. Have a good week.
Take care now.